At the family reunion, my cousin rolled her eyes. "Oh look, he showed up. Must be out of money again." My sister snorted. "He's still living in that crappy apartment." My dad just sipped his wine and said, "If you tried harder, maybe you'd have something to brag about too." I just smiled, waited until everyone had a plate of food, then walked over to the event coordinator and said, "You can cancel the payment. They'll be covering it themselves now." I, 32M, stood in the corner of the banquet hall, watching my family mill around with champagne flutes and practice smiles. The reunion happened every year. Same venue, same people, same tired conversations about who bought what house and whose kid got into which college. I'd been dreading this for weeks, but something told me to show up anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope that things would be different this time. They weren't. My cousin spotted me first. She'd always been the type to notice things she could comment on, and her eyes rolled so dramatically I could see it from across the room. She leaned over to my sister and said something that made them both laugh. I knew what was coming before the words even reached me. She raised her voice just enough for others to hear, asking if I was out of money again and needed to mooch off the family. My sister joined in, mentioning my apartment with that particular sneer she'd perfected over the years. The place was small, sure, but it was mine and I'd worked hard for it. Dad didn't look up from his wine glass. He just took a long sip and mentioned something about trying harder if I wanted anything worth bragging about. The comment landed like it always did, heavy and deliberate. A few relatives nearby pretended they hadn't heard, suddenly very interested in the appetizers. I stood there for a moment, letting it wash over me. The familiar sting of disappointment mixed with something else this time. Anger, maybe. Or clarity. I'd spent years taking these comments, brushing them off, telling myself it didn't matter what they thought. But it did matter. It mattered because I was tired of being their punching bag, their cautionary tale, their example of what not to become. What they didn't know was that I'd been working on something. For the past 3 years, I'd been building a business from the ground up. Nothing flashy, nothing they'd understand or appreciate. I developed software solutions for small businesses, the kind of unsexy back-end work that made companies run smoother but never got headlines. The first year had been brutal. I'd eaten ramen more nights than I could count and watched my savings dwindle to nothing. The second year was better, but still shaky. By the third year, things started clicking. Clients came through referrals. The revenue stabilized. Then it grew. Then it exploded. 6 months ago, I'd sold a majority stake in the company to a larger tech firm. The deal had closed quietly, no press releases, no announcements. Just a wire transfer that changed everything. I'd kept it to myself, partly because I was still processing it, and partly because I knew how my family would react. They'd either dismiss it or try to get their hands on it. Neither option appealed to me, so I'd stayed quiet, kept living in my apartment, kept driving my old car, kept my head down and my mouth shut. And when the reunion invitation came this year, I'd had an idea. The venue was nice, really nice. The kind of place that required a substantial deposit and had a final bill that could make people wince. I'd done some digging and found out Dad had organized it this year, probably to show off. He loved being the generous patriarch, the man who brought everyone together. What he loved even more was making sure everyone knew he'd paid for it. Except this year, he hadn't. I had. 3 weeks ago, I'd contacted the venue's event coordinator. I told her I wanted to cover the entire cost of the reunion as a surprise for my family. She'd been delighted, said it was such a generous gesture. I paid the deposit, signed the contracts, made sure everything was in my name. Then I'd asked her to keep it quiet until I gave her the signal. She'd agreed, probably thinking I was planning some heartwarming reveal. I wasn't. The food started coming out. Servers moved through the room with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. The bar was fully stocked, top shelf everything. People filled their plates, poured their drinks, settled into their seats. The noise level rose as conversations overlapped, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Dad held court at the center table, gesturing broadly as he told some story I'd heard a dozen times before. My cousin walked past me with her plate piled high. She didn't make eye contact. My sister was at the bar, ordering something complicated and expensive. Dad was raising his glass in a toast, thanking everyone for coming and making some joke about family being the only investment that always paid dividends. The irony wasn't lost on me. I waited until everyone was seated and eating. The timing had to be right. Too early and people wouldn't care. Too late and the moment would pass. I spotted the coordinator near the entrance, checking something on her tablet. She looked up and caught my eye. I nodded. Walking across the room felt longer than it should have. People glanced up as I passed, probably wondering where I was going or if I was leaving early like I sometimes did. I reached the coordinator and she smiled at me. That professional warmth that event planner's perfect. I kept my voice low but clear. I told her to cancel the payment. All of it. Remove my card from the system and let them know the bill would need to be covered by someone else. She blinked, confused for a second. Then understanding dawned. Her smile faltered. She started to say something about contracts and deposits, but I cut her off. I explained that I was exercising the cancellation clause in the agreement, the one that allowed for withdrawal up to the day of the event with a penalty. I'd pay the penalty. Just remove my name from everything else. She asked if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. It took her about 10 minutes to process everything on her tablet, making calls to her manager and the billing department. I waited nearby, watching my family enjoy their meal. My uncle was laughing at something. My aunt was taking photos for social media. Everyone looked so content, so comfortable in their little bubble where they could say whatever they wanted without consequences. The coordinator came back looking nervous. She said it was done. The payment had been reversed, and the venue would need settlement before the event concluded. Someone would need to provide payment, or they'd have to work out a payment plan. She asked who she should speak to about the bill. I pointed to my father. I watched from a distance as she approached his table. She leaned in, spoke quietly. Dad's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, anger. He said something sharp enough that nearby conversations paused. The coordinator maintained her composure, showed him something on her tablet. He grabbed it, scrolling furiously. His face went red. My sister noticed the commotion and came over. Then my cousin. They formed a tight cluster around Dad, all looking at the tablet, all talking at once. The coordinator kept pointing to different parts of the screen, explaining something I couldn't hear from where I stood. Dad's voice rose. He wanted to know who had done this, who had played such a sick joke. The coordinator hesitated, then glanced in my direction. Every head at that table turned toward me. I smiled. Not a big smile, not triumphant or cruel. Just a small, knowing smile. The kind that said I knew exactly what I'd done and why. Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He marched over, my sister and cousin trailing behind him like an angry parade. Other tables were watching now, the earlier festive atmosphere cooling into awkward tension. Dad stopped right in front of me, his face still red, his jaw tight. He demanded to know what I'd done. I told him the truth. I'd arranged to pay for the reunion, then changed my mind. The venue needed payment, and it wouldn't be coming from me. He asked why I would do something so petty, so vindictive. My sister chimed in, calling me pathetic, saying this was a new low even for me. I let them finish. Then I spoke, keeping my voice steady and calm. I reminded them of every snide comment, every dismissive remark, every time they'd treated me like I was less than them. I mentioned the jokes about my apartment, my car, my life choices. I brought up the countless times Dad had suggested I was a disappointment, that I needed to try harder, be better, be more like them. My cousin tried to interrupt, saying it was just family banter, that I was being too sensitive. I looked at her and asked if she'd enjoy being the punchline for 20 years. She went quiet. I turned back to Dad. I told him I'd paid for this reunion because I wanted to do something nice, to show that despite everything, I still cared about this family. But sitting here tonight, listening to the same old insults, watching the same old patterns play out, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. And I definitely didn't need to fund their good time while they tore me down. Dad asked how I could even afford to pay for something like this anyway. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. My sister smirked, probably thinking she'd caught me in a lie. I could have walked away then, could have let them wonder. But something in me wanted them to know. I told them about the business, about the 3 years of work, the sleepless nights, the risk and sacrifice. I mentioned the acquisition, the deal that had closed, the fact that I was doing better than fine. I was doing well, really well, better than any of them, actually. The smirk disappeared from my sister's face. My cousin's mouth opened slightly. Dad just stared at me, processing. Someone at a nearby table coughed. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. My aunt finally spoke up from behind them, asking why I'd never said anything. I told her I hadn't seen the point. What would I have done? show up here and brag, turn into the same kind of person who measured worth by bank accounts and square footage? I'd rather live quietly and happily than loudly and miserably. Dad's anger seemed to deflate. He looked older suddenly, tired. He said something about not knowing, about how I should have told them. I pointed out that telling them wouldn't have changed how they treated me. If anything, they would have just found new reasons to resent me or new ways to make me feel small. The coordinator cleared her throat nearby, reminding everyone that the bill still needed to be settled. Dad turned to her, asking how much it was. She told him. His face went pale. My sister and cousin exchanged glances. The number was substantial, more than any of them had probably budgeted for. Dad asked if they could set up a payment plan. The coordinator said she'd have to check with management, but it might be possible. He nodded, looking defeated. I almost felt bad. Almost. I told them I'd cover the penalty fee for the cancellation. That was only fair since I'd agreed to it. But the rest was on them. They could split it however they wanted. I wasn't their ATM or their backup plan. I was done being their safety net while they kicked me. My sister called me selfish. She said this was supposed to be a family event, a time to come together, and I was ruining it. I asked her when she'd ever cared about coming together as a family beyond the photo opportunities. She didn't have an answer. I looked around the room at all the faces watching us. Aunts, uncles, cousins twice removed, family friends who'd known me since I was a kid. Some looked shocked. Others looked sympathetic. A few seemed amused by the drama. I realized I didn't care what any of them thought anymore. I told Dad and the others that I was leaving. I wished them luck with the bill and hoped they enjoyed the rest of their evening. I started walking toward the exit. Behind me, voices rose again, arguing about who would pay what and how they'd handle this. I didn't turn around. The coordinator caught up with me at the door. She apologized for the awkwardness, said she hadn't meant to cause a scene. I told her it wasn't her fault. She'd just done her job. I asked her to send me the penalty invoice and I'd take care of it. She thanked me and wished me a good evening. The night air hit me as I stepped outside. Cool and clean. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Text messages coming in. My sister demanding I come back and fix this. My cousin calling me immature. An uncle asking what had happened. I turned off my phone and walked to my car. Update 1. The messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, my phone blew up with calls and texts from various family members. Most wanted to know what had happened. Some took sides. A few distant relatives I barely knew reached out to say they'd heard what went down and good for me. My sister sent increasingly angry messages about how I'd humiliated the family and destroyed the reunion. Dad didn't contact me at all. I learned through my aunt that they'd ended up splitting the bill between several family members. Dad covered about half. My sister and cousin each took a portion, and a few others chipped in smaller amounts. The final dinner had apparently been tense and awkward after I left, with most people eating quickly and leaving early. My aunt said she didn't blame me for what I did, but she wished I'd handled it differently. I told her I'd spent 20 years handling it differently, and it had gotten me nowhere. My mom called. She'd been at the reunion, but stayed out of the confrontation. She asked me to talk to Dad, to try to smooth things over. I reminded her that Dad hadn't called me once to apologize or even acknowledge his behavior. She went quiet, then admitted he was stubborn and proud. I told her I was done making the first move, done being the one who bent to keep the peace. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into new projects, expanded the business into areas I'd been considering. Without the weight of family expectations and constant criticism, I felt freer to take risks and trust my instincts. The business continued growing. I hired more people. We landed bigger contracts. Every success felt sweeter knowing I'd done it despite them, not because of them. About 2 months after the reunion, my cousin reached out. She apologized, said she'd been thinking about that night and realized she'd been cruel for no reason. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious more than anything. We met at a place near my office. She looked uncomfortable the entire time, fidgeting with her cup. She told me she'd always been jealous of me, not of my success, but of my freedom. She'd followed every rule, met every expectation, done everything the family wanted. She had the right job, the right house, the right husband. But she was miserable. Watching me walk away from the reunion, from all of them, had made her realize she'd never have the courage to do the same. I didn't know what to say to that. I told her I wasn't free because I was brave. I was free because I'd finally hit my limit. There's a difference. She asked if I'd ever come back to family events. I said probably not, at least not for a while. Maybe not ever. She nodded like she understood. My sister never apologized. She doubled down, actually. She posted vague things on social media about ungrateful siblings and family loyalty. A few of her friends reached out to me with concerned messages, having heard her version of events. I didn't bother correcting the record. People who knew me knew the truth. People who didn't weren't worth the energy. Dad finally called 3 months after the reunion. It was late on a Tuesday. He didn't apologize outright, but he said he'd been thinking about what I'd said that night. He asked if we could have dinner sometime, just the two of us. I told him I'd think about it. He sounded older on the phone, more uncertain. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to repair what was broken. But another part remembered every time he'd made me feel small, every casual cruelty disguised as advice. I told him I needed time. He accepted that. We haven't had that dinner yet. Maybe we will eventually. Maybe we won't. I'm okay with either outcome. The business hit a major milestone last month. We were featured in a tech industry publication as one of the fastest growing companies in our sector. The article mentioned my background, the early struggles, the eventual success. My phone blew up again, but this time with congratulations instead of criticism. Several family members reached out, suddenly interested in what I was doing and how I'd done it. I responded politely, but kept my distance. What surprised me most was how little their validation meant now that I had it. For years, I'd imagined how good it would feel to prove them wrong, to show them I was more than they'd given me credit for. But when it actually happened, when they finally saw what I'd accomplished, I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that their opinions had never been the problem. My need for their opinions had been the problem. I moved out of the apartment they'd mocked. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted more space and I could afford it. I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ostentatious, just comfortable and mine. I didn't tell anyone in the family about it. Didn't send pictures or invite them over. It wasn't about hiding my success. It was about protecting my peace. My aunt visited once. She'd asked if she could see the new place, and I'd agreed. She walked through the rooms, admiring the space and the light. Before she left, she hugged me and said she was proud of me. Not for the money or the business, but for standing up for myself. That meant more than all the congratulations from everyone else combined. I still think about that night at the reunion sometimes. The look on their faces when they realized what I'd done. The chaos that followed. Part of me wonders if I went too far, if there was a better way to handle it. But then I remember sitting in that corner, listening to them tear me down for the 1,000th time, and I know I'd do it again. Some bridges are worth burning if they're the only way to stop people from walking all over you. I'm building a new life now. One where my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. One where I surround myself with people who support me instead of diminish me. The family I was born into might never understand that. And that's okay. I've made my peace with it. The penalty fee invoice came through a few days after the reunion. I paid it without complaint. It was worth every penny.